Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Flat Files. We are chatting with Alia, and Alia is a writer, a comedian, a cultural consultant, and several other things. Alia's just recently published a book, and we have this really wonderful chat with her where we talk about kind of her transition through grad school into doing improv and overcoming fear, and talking about her work at Pis Collective, and we chat about being a comedian and about her Filipino heritage.
It's a really wonderful conversation, and we hope that you enjoy it. If you do, be sure to share it with someone else that's a friend or family member or acquaintance, or just your social networks. Someone else might enjoy this lovely conversation as well, and it helps us out a lot if you spread the word. Let people know that we're having these lovely interviews with artists and makers and performers from across Canada and the US, and hopefully, eventually, globally.
Please like and subscribe to our channel. Those two things help us a lot. And if you are in some sort of financial stable situation and you want to support us financially, you can become a Patreon supporter, and you can see the link below in our description.
Enjoy the episode. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of Flat Files. We're super duper happy to have you and get a chance to talk to you in a bit of a different capacity than we have in our previous collaborations together. And so let's just start off by passing it over and letting you introduce yourself to the folks that are watching.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on here. Yeah, my name is Alia Rasul, and I am a comedian, writer, and performer based in Toronto. I'm part of a multidisciplinary performing arts collective. We're all Filipina, named Tita Collective, and I also work at a culture consultancy. That's what we refer to ourselves most of the time. So I am a project manager there, and the consultancy is called Pis Collective.
I'm really excited to hear you talk about all the different facets of your creative practice, because it covers so much, and I feel like it's touching on parts of the creative community that we haven't really had an opportunity to explore on Flat Files. A lot of the times we're speaking to people that are either working in the craft field or the visual arts field. We have had writers and we've had one musician, but maybe it's because theater is a little bit more, the terms are a lot longer. I feel like the creation process takes forever, and that's similar with writers, I would say. And so I feel like we kind of we're reaching out to people, one, when things weren't happening, and then two, when maybe things started to pick up and everybody was like, I'm really overwhelmed. I don't have space for this right now. So I'm thrilled to talk about all these different components and to be able to speak to someone that's worked in the theater world and the comedy world, because that's not something we have had a lot of experience in.
Nope,
definitely not comedy. I did sit as I wasn't a prop. How would I describe what I was? I did an improv thing where I was being asked questions about my history, and then the improv group was responding to parts of those stories. So It was a super low stakes for me. And that's the closest I've ever been to anything comedy related. I feel like comedy seems so scary.
Well, I'm glad you brought up improv, because that was my way into this. So prior to becoming a performer or identifying really as an artist, I was your, graduate from university, got a 9-to-5 corporate job, and then suddenly realized one day that, oh my gosh, I love my job, but it is my entire identity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the other part of that was I had, and I still do, had terrible stage fright. I had a lot of anxiety about speaking in public. It was so bad. It was to the point that my last few years in university, if I had to present a piece as part of my grade, I pretty much would either bail or ask the professor to is there another way for me to get that grade? And I loved my job. I worked at Second Cup, the headquarters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know I have a lot of random, a very diverse work experience. My resume is interesting to me, but there's a lot of different things there. But there was a job within that organization that I really wanted. and it was to be like your coffee expert, the person to train franchisees who wanted to open their coffee shop. So you had to be entertaining, and I wanted that job. So I had to figure out a way to get over my fear, or at least have some strategies to manage it. Friend of mine recommended two things. One was Toastmasters and the other was improv. So I was like, improv, like just get up on stage and like be funny. No thanks. So I went and audited a Toastmasters class, session, gathering.
Maybe you can explain what Toastmasters, like we know what Toastmasters is because we've been introduced to it through also having to do more public speaking, but I had no idea what it was prior to that moment.
Yeah, and forgive me if this is a wrong description of Toastmasters, Toastmasters that are watching this, but basically it's an avenue or like, I don't know, extracurricular activity gathering for folks who are looking to really improve public speaking. So I think folks prepare speeches and then present them, and then I think like you have peer feedback on how to improve your presentation, and then through repetition and through just like being around like-minded folks, like you improve, right? So I was like, that is more of a fit for me because like I'm not a artist or performer. So I went, and then the thing that really like stressed me out, and no offense, Toastmasters is just, respect what you do, which just stressed me out, was every time someone said or like they would count it.
Oh, I would do very poorly.
I was like, I can't. And so my friend was like, for improv, you don't have to prepare. You literally just make it up. And I'm like, okay, let's try it. And then I found out that there were improv classes being offered like just down my street. I'm like, extra good. So I started taking improv classes, which is for someone who's so shy, like was a wild thing, but I had a really good time. So for those who don't know what improv is improvisational comedy is like basically you just get up on scene and make up everything on the spot. There's obviously a lot of theory around it if you want to get really nerdy about it, but I won't. I won't. So I did one class and it was just fun. Like it was a fun avenue to just play.
Yeah.
And then I took the next class, and then I took the next class, and eventually I performed my first improv set in front of 3 people. It's not surprising that it's hard to get an audience in a student improv show, but it was a lot of fun. And I think, my intention was also like just to find other things in Toronto that I enjoyed, and there was a community there. So that's how that started.
What do you think you like took away from like the improv experience that was sort of specifically beneficial by comparison to like something that was a bit more like formal and business structured, like the Toastmasters?
Yeah, I think like my relationship with failure and picking up and moving on, that was like instrumental.
Oh, that's great. That is such a part of improv that would be very, very valuable.
Yeah, because it's all about like because usually you get a suggestion so that a whole team based on that suggestion comes together and creates a story.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't pick up everything that everyone's putting down, right? And so improv kind of shifts the mentality around like dropping the ball basically, or failing, and says like, well, every time something weird happens, that is an opportunity to open up a different channel for exploration, right? Like another way into the story. And it's more fun if you're like, oops, I messed up. And then it's a win when you just like pick yourself up and then move on. That one thing was so important because I think I had spent most of my life, if it's not perfect, suddenly it's just shut down. You shut down right away. You're just overwhelmed by like the cringing of your body, and then you just want to like bury like that. So that's what kind of stopped me from even asking questions, right? So yeah. So improv really gives you like space to sort of give whatever thought you have enough time and air to be like, okay, what is this worth really, as opposed to, we call it editing yourself, or like editing yourself before giving yourself a chance to like, okay, this is actually what I wanted to talk about. And so that was my way into comedy. And improv eventually, like once I kind of got the handle of the basics, I started to like really be a bigger part of the comedy world. So I moved into sketch, which is through the Second City like program. And so then that's when they layer on, because Second City is all about doing comedy that's satirical. And that's where I learned like to ask myself, like, what is my point of view? And it's so funny because like for me, I throughout my life like did not empower myself, or I just followed sort of like you graduate high school, you graduate university, you get a job, you get a house, like, and I'm like, and
yeah, you're like, these are the milestones. I just need to check these boxes and I'm living correctly.
Yeah. And then I was being challenged to be like, what is your opinion on this? And I'm like, I don't have one. so yeah. And that was like kind of the floodgates. I'm like, oh wow, I can have an opinion and really like push it out there. Yeah. And then I guess I just haven't stopped expressing my opinion since. And some of my opinions are very like, well, I started getting, because it's satire and, you know, being a woman of color in comedy, they really encourage you to look. It was like, I don't want to say it's in fashion. It was in fashion to be like, okay, explore your identity, explore like, you know, your oppression and trauma, but you know what I mean? Like more jazzy terms. So, and that's when I started to really form like, oh, what do I care about in the world? And what do I want to put out there? And so like who am I? Which is so wild. I really had an existential crisis.
Was that challenging? Like, was it like emotional, or was it, I guess maybe it was a combination of like exciting, but also was it strange to be like, oh, I never thought about myself as an individual in this space? Yeah. Or
yeah, it was very, and it is still very strange. And a lot of it is like just unlearning a few cultural things too, which is you follow a certain path. And then I think we're not really encouraged to speak our minds in certain contexts, and I also just absorbed and learned things. Like it's not like my parents. It's so strange because it's not like my parents ever sat me down like, look, you don't speak your mind. Do you know what I mean? It's just I had somehow, I don't know how, learned that like it's better to just keep your head down and go through life. As long as you check the boxes, you should be okay.
When did you move to Canada?
I moved to Canada for university. So, I moved to Canada like 2006. So
your parents are still in the Philippines then?
I grew up in Dubai actually, which is a whole other thing. But so my mom, that's for another flat file. But yeah, so that's another part too. It's sort of like once those questions, I'm like, who am I? And then you're like, who am I? It's overwhelming. I think as I've grown kind of in this craft, you know, now have like a more sophisticated lens with which to view that things. I'm like, okay, it is overwhelming, but it's great. Like you can just chunk it out in pieces, explore a little bit each time. So that's where I'm at. Like, so after sketch comedy, I co-founded a group called the Tita Collective, and that is formed to basically explore comedy from like a Philippine diaspora, like through the lens of like Philippine diasporic identity.
But it's predominantly women too, right? Or yeah, okay.
So that's been fun. We were like we've been working together for 4 years, and our main thing, and which for me as an artist right now or as a writer comedian, like explores like our relationship to the Philippine heritage, our relationship to Canadian heritage. Like I've lived here more than a decade now, and most of the members of that group are Canadian born, so very much like I'm Canadian too, right?
Yeah.
And like like the tension between the two, and being women on top of that, which is there's a lot of themes to pull from. So we're still writing based on that, and the show that we created together is called Tita Jokes. Tita in Tagalog means aunt, so it's literally like auntie jokes. And when we put together the show, it was during a time where even me, as someone who had already done sketch comedy for a few years, it was a novel idea to have a show that's just all Filipinas. It's like it was a strange thing that just wasn't done, right? Like it was always like we have a 6-member cast, and you'll have maybe like one BIPOC person, right? And so we were like, well, how about if all 5 of us are? So when we opened the show, we were like, honestly, nauseous. Like, no,
really?
Yeah, because the other thing too is like, as you don't see many Filipinos in live comedy audiences as well. So we were a little bit nauseated at the idea of being vulnerable with like, we're going to be representing people we love, like our aunts, our grandmothers, and like, and obviously approaching that with love and compassion too, because a lot of comedy about Filipinas were like, they were the butt of or we were the butt of the jokes. And so we actually had a few older Filipinas be like, I was nervous coming into this show.
Right.
But like our whole thing is we framed it as, it is a comedy show, but it is a love letter to the Titas. And that is our promise to you. The reception to that was, I think I cried first night. It was embarrassing because my friends.
I don't think that's embarrassing at all.
I was like, I was like, just did this comedy show, doing really silly things and crying at the end. My friend.
Where was that show? Where did it?
So we debuted it, like we had workshopped the show at Second City, but then we debuted like the bigger version of the show at the Toronto Fringe in 2019. Oh. And I remember, like, if you're familiar with theater spaces in Toronto, like ours was in the main space at Tarragon Theater, which is nauseatingly large, because we were like this new group. We got onto the wait list at Fringe, and we were like, let's get a nice small space, so we don't have to sell so many tickets,
right? And
we got in on the wait list, and because we did that, there was only like the biggest space possible. And so we're like, how are we going to sell 1,400 tickets?
Oh my God. Oh my gosh.
And there's nothing worse. Like, no matter how good your show is, like, there's nothing worse than doing it in a cavernous, like, theater with like 5 people. Even if there was 50 people, which would be nice in a small space, which is what we were hoping for. It feels bad. So I remember like our last rehearsal right before the show, we were all like just sitting in front of the end, and we're like, this is going to be bad, right? They're like, you know what? It's okay. Just for us, it's fine. And then we ended up selling out the first show. And
that's amazing. Congratulations. I know that's like 2019, but I feel like we didn't get to celebrate things that happened in 2019.
This is the last time we got to perform it. So. The first night, like, it was wild. Like, we just absolutely had zero idea of how it would be received, because there was no reference for it. Like,
no, there's none. Like, you're pushing the
now
boundaries.
There's a lot. Like TikTok, you have a lot of like.
I was gonna say, are you like? Because I follow a lot of like that kind of like anti-joke TikTok, and what I love about it is that sometimes I literally don't get it at all. Like, I'm like, well, I don't know what's funny about this, and then I rewatch it and I write down like part of it so that I'm like, okay, let's look it up on the internet. Maybe the internet can tell me. And then sometimes I just never find out the humor, and I kind of love that. Like, for me, I think that's really important and good. And I guess because I like a lot of those things, I feel like most of my TikTok is filled with that and voiceover actors and
yeah. But like, you have to like TikTok and like Reels and those kinds of things. Like, I was never into Vine, so I never got into that world, and that was very short lived. But TikTok and Reels, that kind of is throughout the pandemic, right? So right before that, the only kind of Tita related content was like prominent Filipino stand-ups making fun of their mom, right? Which it works for some people, but you know, as a woman, sometimes I'm like, I'm offended by that. It was wild. And I think because it was such a, like, we kind of broke a lot of rules that and the other thing is Filipinos actually drove into downtown Toronto to come to Fringe. The other thing was like, there were other 2 Filipino shows that year. So we decided to band together and was smart. Like, let us share this audience, right?
Yeah.
So we created a hashtag, Filipinx Fringe, and it made it to the Toronto Star. It was a wild time. Like, honestly, highlight of my life. And yeah, it's been fun ever since. Yeah. So that experience just encouraged me to like feel a little bit more brave about, just being unapologetic about like, yes, this is my specific point of view. I'm going to intentionally go against like the thing that I learned, which is like, try to make sure it's relevant to anyone, because comedy is only funny if people relate to it. However, it's so funny. There's also like, there is like it's universal in its specificity. So one of the things that was really surprising to me that came out of this entire project was like the different kinds of folks, like either their best friend was Filipino growing up. They're related through marriage to Filipinos. Like everyone is Filipino, is more Filipino than you think. And on top of that, like, because we get so specific, because we're not just one person in the cast talking about their identity. We're like 5 women of Filipino identity, showing that the thing that you see, like it's not a monolithic identity. Like within it, there's diversity as well. So we have the room to be as specific as we want, and it's those specific details that people kind of glom onto, regardless of whether they're Filipino or not. So we talk about Catholicism. So Catholics are like, yeah, my aunt's gossip in church too, or like. Members of other immigrant like diasporas are like, I love skyflakes. They like, we use biscuit tins as sewing kits too, right? So that's been really like fun and rewarding. From that, I started a poetry like practice, like just writing practice, and just keeping on trucking. But so I do like, it's funny because like when you talk about I do a lot of things. It's all really focused on the one like question for me, which is like, what is my relationship to my heritage, and how do I feel about that in the context of my new, like as a new Canadian? Because
the writing projects, but also like your YouTube projects are also working within that realm as well. So I think that it's really. Did you ever get that job that you wanted to get? That like kind of led you on this path?
Oh, yes, I did actually. Yeah, I did. And then, and then I got poached away. It was like such a fun, I was like, I just want to be a coffee nerd. And then, my boss went and became a president at a different restaurant company. And he's like, you will be the coffee person if you come with me. And I'm like, okay. So fun times.
So what then led you to be with Bespoke, and like what, I guess like maybe describe a little bit about what that entity is. I remember when we, like full disclosure, we worked with Bespoke, Kyle and I, and in those discussions at one point, I remember there was kind of like consultancy was a word that was like a formal element that was part of the title, but it felt like it was more like functioning as a way to help people like us who needed to like hire consultants for funding, but like really work with people that are actually invested in like creative placemaking, like generating really vibrant and interesting creative projects, finding collaborations. Like it's not really like consulting. It wasn't like, okay, we're going to audit, tell you who to fire, it's very different than that. Like the way that you would think of the word consulting.
As depicted on TV.
Yeah, as depicted on like House of Lies or whatever.
Yeah, I know. The thing that you're feeling right now is like basically how I felt my first 2 years at Bespoke, where it's like, I guess, I don't know. So how I got to Bespoke and why I decided to join there. So I worked at Second Cup and restaurants. So I have a decade of experience working in hospitality, which is super demanding, right? Like basically you're working 75 hours a week. And then I was also feeling, now that I've discovered like, oh my gosh, like an artistic practice is important for me, and it's important to have that to feel like I'm thriving. I made the decision to make space for that and really commit to it. So I actually joined Bespoke because they were looking for a bookkeeper. And it was kind of like a leap because I was a general manager at the restaurant, and going and like just, the economic decisions that came to that. But I was really like, no, I'd rather start now rebuilding a career so I can give my artistic practice a chance. I also came into art like later than most people, even though there's, really,
later.
Right? At the time I felt like, oh my gosh, I need to be on SNL. Oh, the joys of being like a brand new artist in an institution that tells you their timelines for things. So I joined Bespoke because they were willing to have me on just 3 days a week. It was closer to where I lived. And also I didn't quite understand at the time what they did, but for me, I was like, you work in culture and that looks cool to me. And now I've been there 5 years, which is like mind blowing to me. Like, and in that time, Bespoke is still sort of like, yes, we are cultural consultants, and not in the consulting that you see on TV, which is like everyone's fired and cut profits and bottom line, la la la, right? So
something merger.
Yeah, merge things. No, we don't do that. But we are consultants in the way that I think like we just come in to like help people think things through. So I work with an awesome person named Christina Bagatavagis in Bespoke. She founded with they're a Bespoke cultural collective. So they were a group of women who had different practices. So Christina, oh my gosh, I don't even know. She was an art historian. She had worked at the Tate, and she worked with architects and cultural programmers to do interesting work in the field, whatever interesting work means. Yeah, but Bespoke, basically what we do is cultural programming, meaning we support organizations in helping them think through fun things that they can devote their energy and funding into. And what's important to us is that those kinds of things eventually, like those kinds of things benefit like the community, and creative well-being is very important to us because we think that that's just like a value that we have as a company. So I don't know if that helps, but so we also help, we help cultural organizations, so like museums, artist collectives, but we also help municipalities understand culture more. We like to facilitate conversations to make sure that the public, because when we help the government, it's all about how they spend public funding. And so it's obviously important that everyone, that there's space for really, really good input and good conversation. So we facilitate those kinds of things and make sure what ends up happening is accountable to what the taxpayers wanted, right?
Right, yeah.
So from bookkeeper, I started supporting like projects in like a coordination way. I get to meet a lot of really cool people and really such smart people. And I've learned a lot. And that, like working with Christina and Sabrina and like all the folks at Bespoke has given me the confidence to also be more assertive in my artistic practice, which then the more I become assertive in my artistic practice, the more I found my voice, which then I use here. And I find it's all coming into, it's all like an ecosystem at the end, is how I understand it. And everything matters. So
yeah.
I just went on a rant. Do you have any questions?
That makes total sense. Like, it's not one specific thing. It's not like what you see in like House of Lies or like where people are just slashing employees. Like when we were working with you folks, like we were trying to figure out how to, I think our original intent was trying to figure out how to grow our residency, but then COVID happened and then we had to pivot. And it was a lot of like just kind of looking at how we present ourselves. And you guys did like a really wicked audit of our business where you talked to everybody that we kind of connected with, and not just like the regular people, but like you picked people from like the different sectors, like people who worked with the municipality or with like other artists or other organizations to like give back to us. Like essentially like kind of held up a mirror and was like, here is how you actually present yourself to the world. And then I think the most memorable thing from the deck that you gave us was when all of our like about us statements came together on one page, and how we inadequately say the same thing amongst 5 different platforms. And like that for us was like a big change, was just being able to see how we present ourselves to the world. And I think like sometimes consulting has that kind of, I guess like that negative connotation that like you're going to slash budgets and cut jobs, and it really isn't that. It's really just about trying to like help you align yourself better with what you guys actually want to do.
Yes, yeah. I like to think of us as like a sounding board, right? And a big part of Bespoke too is communications, and it's like we help folks formulate how they want to talk about themselves and tell their story. And it's funny because we're in the position that you are in where we need a Bespoke, because we were like look at me trying to talk about Bespoke, and I'm like, I don't know. so consultants, moral of the story, consultants need consultants too. One, and it is hard. It is so hard to talk about who you are. I built an entire artistic practice around that because I don't know. I don't know. And it's such a vulnerable process.
Very much so.
It's and it's interesting, right? It's interesting because it's like sometimes who you are isn't who you think you are. And like, it's so, what I'm learning, especially from Christina, is like, it's so important to come into that with such a generosity of spirit and compassion.
I was going to say, like, I feel like the way that you both handled us, especially because like we were entering this like completely gray, dismal, like we got that grant in 2020. And so we were like really like, what is even going to happen with what we're doing? We were so terrified of like being very nervous and then also coming in, not knowing either of you and handing over sort of like this little baby that we had been like nursing for 12 years and saying, okay, well, are they just going to tell us that we suck and that we're like making a ton of mistakes? And even if that is what they're going to say, because like feedback and criticism is valuable, but like, are they going to come at those conversations in a way where we don't just feel defensive? And like, we're not even listening to them because we're trying to like make excuses for all the like things that they're trying to tell us we need to like alter or change or improve on. And that was absolutely not the experience at all, which I'm so grateful for, because that was the expectation that I had going into that project. And maybe at the time I didn't know that you were like, that you did comedy, but like you did bring like a brevity to everything and like, like a cheerfulness and
it's that hospitality.
Maybe
just gonna say that
that's
right
the restaurant part. Yeah.
Hospitality.
Not all comedians are nice.
No, but I do think that like you did have like this, I don't know, it was just like a really good energy in a way that you like presented information to us that felt like fun and exciting, and like even if it was kind of like, oh wow, we really aren't presenting ourselves consistently across the board, it like didn't feel like we were bogged down by like what we needed to be thinking about. It felt like, oh, it was just like enjoyable. And so I could see how like those parts of what your world is, even the writing part, because that was something you really helped us with as well, was like thinking about, and I think comedians, and you might have actually brought this up when we had our chats, was like comedians are good at figuring out how to state something like plainly, like so it's accessible, so that it feels like clever and fun. And so, I think as artists, especially like in the more traditional sense, you get lost in the like jargon of it and the sort of academic like blah way of talking about something, and have somebody outside of that field say, well, or you could do it like this, and that might actually represent you a bit better than what's happening right now. So that was part of like the consultancy experience that I was definitely not anticipating, and probably is a bit unique to you too as well.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, we loved working with you. So just to bring it back, you know what I mean? Maybe it's not always the same experience. It does. The one thing about being a consultant that is overwhelming sometimes, and it's funny because we just brought on a new person on our team, and they brought this up, and they were like, we had multiple meetings with different clients on the same day, and I'm used to them. I know who they are. I know what their work cultures are like. This person was encountering these different worlds all at the same time. And they pointed out, they're like, it is like you work in different offices. You have completely different language, different company culture. And like the way we present things to have to like match them as well. And I didn't realize I guess I know we're doing that, but it's just for someone to, again, like put that mirror in your face, be like, oh yeah, that's the overwhelming part about a consultant is like we do so much research to make sure that like we're speaking the same language. And so, like basically what I learned is like what you put in is what you get as well. So it is a dance. It is like a relationship. It's a dynamic. So I think a lot of that gentleness too is like everything that Sparkbox does is very like, knowing so much about you too. Like, I think it gives it a disservice if the process didn't reflect that too, right? And honestly, like this book is a little bit like that, but sometimes when we work with like city clients, they can't handle our quirkiness. So maybe I tone down the jokes and talk about being a comedian less with government agencies, who they're like,
I feel like what we get asked a lot is like how you balance being committed to your job, which is you have a pretty heavy job with a lot of research, which I could imagine you can get lost in. Mm-hmm. And especially right now when you're still kind of working from home quite a bit, could maybe seep into your everyday. How do you maintain that creative practice? Because you're still doing a lot. Like, I don't know how recent, I was looking at your Instagram today, and there was like some clips from a series of conversations that you had with other comedians that seemed relatively recent. Mm-hmm. So, how do you structure your life to make sure that there's space for both of those things?
Full disclosure, it was over the last few years, in order to make a lot of this work, exhausted myself, and I think and I'm luckier. I will say, like, because I started working at Bespoke with the intention of focusing on my artistic career, that even though as my role there grew, Christina understands, like my boss understands, my work colleagues understand that I have an artistic practice that I devote time to, which, because Bespoke is, we celebrate culture and artists. So it would make no sense for it, for that company to not make room for that. And so I'm really lucky that, it's so funny in university, when you learn how to like apply for jobs, you're like, look, ask about company culture. It's always, for me, back in the day, was like a throwaway, right? Like you just ask it to seem clever, right? But it is actually so important. Like, so I really lucked out because it's not something I sought out when I was looking for a job. I was just looking for a job that I could not think too hard about. But I lucked out because this company culture encourages me to have an artistic practice. So that's one thing. The second thing is, how do I manage it now? Time off. Time off is so important. Like, I think I had told myself, and it was because I was getting things done. I was like completing my bucket list items, but I wasn't enjoying any of it. And it didn't fill the well until I developed vertigo for 3 weeks, and I literally couldn't stand. Like, your body will find a way to tell you that it's tired, even though you push it, right? So when I had vertigo, I was like literally, and I'm fine now, but it was, and sometimes it happens, like something in your inner ear it's awful. And I was like freaked out because what if it never goes, and then I can't be a performer and I can't respond to emails? Well, that will change your life.
Responding to emails is your concern with vertigo.
You're like, what if I can't be a performer?
Most of our lives is responding to emails, though.
Not whether or not I could stand and function and like live and walk. It's like, can I answer Gmail?
How would I find employment, right? And and that's a whole. I have a work colleague, or like a artist friend, right? Who I collaborate with often, and a lot of her work is around like disability in the arts, and that was a whole other thing. So anyway, like that shifted a lot of things into perspective, and you need rest to play.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people are like, okay, the weekend is all about getting yourself organized, resting, and playing. I'm like, nope. You have to rest, you have to heal, and only then can you play, and then only then can you like ideate and create, and so again, like, because I came into this, the artistic process is the priority. I was like, I have to rest. And so as much as like I love Bespoke too, right? It is a priority now, but that's it. I'm here. Hi, Christina. She knows we talk about this. But like the art, like yourself has, like, I have to prioritize myself. So to answer your question, how am I balancing it? I'm not quite yet, but my new like mandate is to make sure, practically speaking, is like I do not work on the weekends, and I do not work past 5:30. Right? Like anything I do beyond those times have to be things that really, really like light me up. Yeah.
That's such a hard lesson to learn. Like it's incredibly hard to have like a division between those things. It's like, and I think it gets even harder when you work in a job that's within a field you like, because like it's very easy to just let that run away from you. And like you were saying, like you can't enjoy life if you don't give yourself time to relax. And I feel like, at least I feel this way, that often I'm like, I just want to make more. I'm not doing enough. I need to work harder. But like all you end up doing is just burning yourself out even more, and you don't enjoy doing any of it. And so it seems almost counterintuitive to stop and take a breath and step back. But you have to do that in order to appreciate all the things that you're working on.
Yes. And so one of the things that I had always wanted to do in my life was to write a book and publish a book.
Which you did.
I did, and I'm very proud of it. But if I'm being...
You can say the name of the book. Just as a
the
suggestion.
book I published. The book is Super Important Filipina Thoughts, and the thesis around that is basically like, again, like there's that fracturing of identities, but because I'm Filipina, everything I do is Filipina. So I have a full poem about charcuterie boards, and my argument is that it's Filipina because I, as a Filipina, enjoy the charcuterie board. So I mean, I started that project because, on top, again, like with that hesitancy of like trusting my own voice and my opinion, that also, like, it was difficult for me to write. And I think more than anything in my life, like I want to be a writer, you know, and as a comedian, like comedy, like the line is I'm not going to write drama. I'm just saying, I didn't even realize I only watched comedies until someone pointed it out. And I'm like, oh yeah. Because they were like, do you want to watch this Nicolas Cage movie? This is a terrible example. Do you want to watch this movie?
Okay.
I actually love, sorry. So someone was like, do you want to watch this like action movie? And I'm like, I have never heard of that. And no, I don't. Can we please watch Encanto? So I started writing that book because I just wanted to put out like a single sentence, a thought without overthinking it. And it became this practice of like kind of journal, like poetry journals. Is like, I love things to be succinct. I can't do a journal entry. It's overwhelming for me, but like a short poem I can do. And that became a book. Like someone reached out, like, this should be a book, and it became a book. But I got in my head so much about it. It really stressed me out that the entire process, in retrospect, I should have been like, this is amazing. I'm writing a book. Someone's trusting me to write a book. My brain was always like, oh my gosh, what if this sucks? Every day of that process, you know? And a big part of that is because I was exhausted. I didn't have great mental health at the time. It was the pandemic. And you know, when you imagine like publishing your first book, you're like, it should be a fun, celebratory thing. And so, yeah, right? Like it should have been the process that you enjoyed.
Do you think that if you had written everything and then someone approached you and said, could we compile this into a book, that it would have been a different experience?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, maybe. But then there was also the work. I think the part that stressed me out the most was also the order of the poem. I spent longer on that, and I really got in my head about it.
I would never even think about that.
Like the order of the poem, like it took me 4 months to do.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and then an extra 2 months of just being like, of being panicked about it.
Do you have it? Do you have
the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. It's over here. Here you go. Super important Filipino thoughts.
Love that. Who did the cover?
It's this amazing. This amazing young artist in Montreal, Ahlyssa, Dulay, and yeah, we worked really collaboratively on the cover, and that was for me the most fun.
Cool. It's really lovely.
The other lesson for that is like, for me, is if I'm on my own, I can really I don't want to be on my own that much creating. Like I'm like a social creator. I love collaborating in a room and riffing, and so that was a good lesson. But yeah, that was fun. The cover I'm super happy with. The order still, sometimes I'm like, did I do the right thing? And
yes.
With the perspective that I have now, it's like, number one, like if it feels good to you at that point in time that you decided, you know, then it was the right thing.
Yeah.
And then we move on. I think I also put too much weight on like, it's a book. People are good, you know, it's like, like sometimes we like get so caught up in like terms like you're an artist, or you're a published author now, as though like those are the things that define you. Mm-hmm. And yes, we subscribe to a world where like, yes, those matters, but like at the end of the day, like that's not the thing that fills you up. The thing that fills you up is like someone reaching out. Like my favorite thing was I have like all of these poems are really silly. So the stakes are not even high, folks. Like, do you know what I mean? I have a poem that's literally just like, where are you? And then from like 40 repeated 40 times until the page runs out. And one of my favorite things that has ever happened since I've published this book is like, there's a high school high school class in Winnipeg, and in their French class, they used my book to translate, because like, I think in Winnipeg, there are a lot of Filipinos, so a lot of like young Filipino, okay. Like, yeah, it's a big population of Filipino immigrants there. And so that high school had a lot of Filipinos. So the teacher reached out and was like, we're using your book as material because it resonates with my students. And they did reflections on it, and someone sent back like just the French version and a drawing of, you know, how they felt when they read that. And Alia, who was in her head so much, was like, this is so silly. Like, I'm just repeating the word from 40 times. Like, it makes sense to me, but like, doesn't make sense to the rest of the world. But for that, like, I don't know, 14-year-old, it did. So I was like, you know what? It's fine. It's fine.
That's so special.
Yeah.
And I think like you're so right. Like those are the things that you have to like kind of keep at the forefront of, you know, why it was valuable, why, you know, putting those, you know, potentially silly words onto a page, because you don't know who is going to connect with it and why they're going to connect with it and what that could potentially bring to someone. That is the cool thing about being in the arts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was far more rewarding than like, I got a PR person. So it's hard to feel great about like, you know, when you get on a list on those, that is the PR person's job. I paid them to do that, but it looks very cool to people to be like, oh, you're in the top 10 comedy books to buy this Christmas. Yay, capitalism. To my parents who are not in, in Canada are like, oh, look at my daughter. She's on this top 10 list, but I paid for that. Y'all. You can do that. Press agents are amazing.
The authentic accomplishments of like being a published author isn't necessarily being on those lists. It's those connections and those stories that you make with people.
Well, and having a teacher say, finally, I have a piece of literature that this entire group of students is connecting with. Like, this changes the dynamic of my classroom. This changes my relationship with my class. This changes my class's relationship with each other. Like, that's what writing is really about.
Yeah.
So,
well, I didn't even think about it that
way. I just think that that's really remarkable. And especially since the book is recent, like that's really great. Also, we learned, was that with Shannon, the flat files that we're putting up today, that like if people search for the author in their like local library or like one of those library apps, that's like incredibly beneficial to like young authors and new authors. So everybody search for Alia's book. And get your libraries to get the book in, even if it's is there like, can people get a digital version so that it can be like a digital version of like their library?
Not yet, but soon.
Okay, cool.
Soon. I'm pushing my publisher to do that.
Should we do art shares? I feel like there's probably going to be we get a lot of questions about publishers and getting a published book. So maybe one day we'll do like a little short segment with you, like that's like hyper focused, because gosh, we get a lot of questions about that. And we don't know
anything about that.
Anything about that world is like nothing. I think writing is a terrifying process. You know, maybe one day we'll chat more about that. But I feel like we should do some art shares.
Yeah, let's do some art shares. As our guest, you have the choice like of leading the art share, or you want us to lead the art share. I think we have something.
We have two things.
Yeah, I'd love for you to lead the art share and we'll see where we go.
Full disclosure, I didn't do a lot of research on these prints. So we're just going to fly by the seat of our pants with these ones. So Kyle did a
portfolio exchange.
Yeah. And there were two that we haven't shown yet. So these are the last two of the exchange. So portfolio exchanges, basically Kyle got invited to participate in a collection of prints, and all of the artists that participated get a portfolio of the prints that are given to the collection. And then usually that collection is then exhibited usually like around or where the person that put it together.
Yeah, I believe that's
in Alberta.
This is in Alberta.
Yeah.
So I get to put on my CV that I have a show in Alberta somewhere.
Woo!
So this work is by Luke Johnson. Yes, Luke Johnson. I don't know what the process is, if I'm being 100% honest, but the project itself was called Bituminous Parting. So it was looking at the material that's used. Well, Kyle, you can explain it because it's your print exchange.
Yeah, the whole print exchange was about bituminous parting. And so it was about the kind of like new technologies or just moving away from oil-based stuff. The world of printmaking is like entrenched in technology and materials that's like 100 to 150 years old. And a lot of it by today's standards is like not the best for the environment. And so the whole portfolio was kind of dealing with this theme of like either moving away from that in terms of how you use your materials to create artwork, or creating artwork that talks about those kinds of like that kind of environmental issue that's surrounding contemporary printmakers. Yeah, I'm not sure how this one was made. But.
No, it's really beautiful. Like the top has this like gradient of texture, and then these very like clear gouges, like they look like scars in the surface. And then it's not
It's definitely a little plate that's been imprinted into it.
Yeah, there's like a slight embossment on this fossil that's down in the corner. What does it say? Nor are plastics excluded from grace is the title. So that's our first share. I love the colors. It's really nice.
It's beautiful.
Oh, obviously,
wow.
Some sort of fossil, which references the fact that like oil products are made from dead things.
You know what? Honestly, I didn't know that for a long time.
What?
Like when I was a teen, I never thought about like fossil fuels being like literally fossil. I don't know why. I just did it. It wasn't. Yeah.
I grew up in the Middle East, which is like
you grew up in Dubai,
Saudi Arabia,
and
Dubai. Yeah, I know. I'm like, it was like petroleum
Dubai
jelly
only exists because of oil.
I know. Yeah.
So that was our first share. Do you have something to share with us?
I do, and my lack of knowledge of it is a big important. Okay, so I don't know if this.
A textile. I love it.
It's a textile. So this is called a Pis Siyabit, and yeah,
okay.
Pis Siyabit. So this textile is specifically from Sulu, or like the Tausug people, which is I am part of. Like I am a Tausug.
Okay.
And
I don't know where that is.
So the Tausug, like Sulu, is basically in the south of the Philippines.
Okay, south.
In Muslim Mindanao.
Okay.
And just hold it up like this. No, like this.
Is it silk? What is the?
So it's sometimes it's silk, sometimes it's cotton. This specific one is cotton. No one is like this ever the same. It's always, each one is unique, and it usually follows like a geometric kind of. It's usually geometric, which so for me, like I actually don't know a lot about the history of pre-colonial Philippines and like Tausug culture before like Islam came in. So I'm like Muslim Filipino, or partially like through my dad, I'm Muslim Filipino, and most folks know Philippines is a very Catholic country. So I'm like so even when exploring identity, right? It's like it's like all these layers, and I'm still trying to get my way back to understanding my relationship with my Tausug culture. So the Tausugs of Sulu were part of like the Sultanate of Sulu in North Borneo. So it's like Southeast Asia. We were Tausug translated means people of the current. So we were a seafaring people, pearl farmers, fishers. And this is specifically, and I own, this is specifically used by, it's like gendered for some reason. I mean, like a lot of clothing was, I guess, you know, historically, but this was usually worn by men, which is why I like to wear it. To like be like, I can wear it too.
Just push those gender stereotypes.
Yes. But yeah, so this is like very, when you see like this geometric pattern, it's very, very Sulu, very, very Tausug. And also when it comes to Islamic art, it's also usually geometric. So I wonder if there's like an influence there, but I'm not sure. I bring up like my lack of connection to this because like that is like what I'm exploring, because I'm literally of that place, and my dad speaks that language, and I still feel like I don't have a right. Like growing up, I feel like I didn't have a right to this, because I didn't grow up there. I grew up in Dubai, but now I'm kind of, you know, pushing against that. Yeah. So yes, usually used as a head covering, and a textile. There's a huge tradition of textiles in the Philippines in general.
Do you know? It's just so hard through, obviously, a Zoom camera. Is it woven or is it printed?
It's woven. It's woven. Like very finely woven.
Oh, cool!
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it took me a while to like buy one, because I just felt so. I don't know.
You weren't allowed.
Yeah, it's strange. It's like I felt like I wasn't allowed, and I bought my first piece, and like because they're so intricate, and obviously, you know, like so it's expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like one of my prized possessions, and I love it so much. And the thing with a lot of young Filipinos in Canada, or even me, like growing up in Dubai, we have such a fragile connection to these textiles. They look cool, so it's easy to like make them fashionable, but like oftentimes like there's not a lot of space or energy into understanding the context of these things and why it's important. And so so I'm just like embarking with that connection. And like being an artist, like I found like that was my easy way to connect with my roots.
That's lovely. And that is like, I mean, I recently, my grandmother passed, and we just went through some of her belongings, and she had gotten like the tartan. So my grandmother's family is Scottish, and so she had gotten the tartan of like our family, the Mackenzies, sent to her so that she could make a kilt, and my mom gave it to me. And I feel kind of weird about it. Like I love it and I want to wear it, but I also feel like that, like, I think like kilts, like it's really lovely. It's long. It's like a good length. It's a nice color.
You've never worn kilts.
And
you've never identified as being Scottish.
Yeah. And it's also like that strangeness of like, it would look good paired with a turtleneck and like a pair of, wool tights. But also like my grandma put all of this thought and like purpose and intention and like, she made this a long time ago where it wasn't like you just went on Google or whatever. I don't even know how she got the fabric, like who do you talk, how does that work? Would she write a letter? And so I'm like, do I put it in a shadow box? Like, what do I do with this piece of fabric? Obviously, like I'm a white person living in Canada. So I feel like those like cultural relationships feel like they don't have to be as like, I don't know, like frictiony. I don't know how else to describe that. Maybe that's not like the right way to talk about it. But so like, I can't even imagine, like this masculine piece of textile.
I feel like you just expressed exactly how I feel with this textile. Like, my dad speaks the language and I feel like I'm appropriating his culture. And
that's
I
so
am
weird.
of him, right?
You are of him.
Like I still, okay, like I've actually never worn it because what do I do with this? Like, I like to look at it and, but I feel like, is there a time when I'm going to feel Tausug enough? Maybe never, but then there's also a part of me that's like, isn't it also kind of my job to like make sure this artistic practice or the understanding or the wisdom and the knowledge of this craft moves on to the next generation? So I don't know, but like exactly, it's the same, it's like,
I also think that's what's also really fascinating about that is that this like specific way to weave fibers together has this like massive context linked to it. Like what? I don't think I've really like thought about this way before. And it's really wild.
It's I hadn't either. And like, until I moved to Canada and like around now when everyone's kind of like reaching back into like their own heritages and find inspiration, but then taking it out of context and like kind of, so the other thing about the Tausugs is that like they're an extremely marginalized group in the Philippines. So I have a lot of like friends and artists who I love dearly, like Filipino artists who I love dearly and respect, but kind of pull like Tausug like kind of crafts and like textures and textile and like remixing that into their own thing, which is like, that's, that is their practice, but I feel a way about it too. I already feel like I'm appropriating it and I'm like, I've got that blood running through me. And so when I look at that, it's confusing. And that's like where I'm sitting right now. Like I don't know what's right or wrong, but I do know that it is important for anyone borrowing or looking at a culture, like understand it fully, because you with this in a specific context may be hurtful to some people. It will so if you're going to choose to do that, do you know that you're doing that, or are you just doing it as a fun thing, right? Like, again, there's no right or wrong. Everyone's artistic practice is what they are. But, for me, like a value that I've developed is like, if you're going to borrow, like what is the context? What's the
intention of that borrowing?
What is the intention?
Yeah.
Which is for me still like a question mark, which is why I haven't worn it.
Oh, I so appreciate you sharing that with us. like
Oh,
for a
okay.
lot of different reasons. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing about your tartan.
Yeah, and maybe one day I'll wear it. It is really lovely.
Do you have it?
I do have it. Yeah, it's in the other room. If you want to show this, I can go grab it.
Okay.
This is the last print of this group.
Toronto.
It is. I'm so glad that you're like, it's Toronto. Yeah. There's that little, this identifier. This piece is called Corrosive Growth. And I'm thinking that it feels a little bit like a screen print. So this is another one from that same portfolio series. And I think it's the last one that we've shared from it. But this one, as you can see, is like that whole cityscape of Toronto with what looks to be like kind of this looming cloud above it. See if we can look a little bit closer. Oh, that definitely is Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah. I enjoy being part of this portfolio. Like portfolio exchanges are like, I don't know if this happens in like other practices, but it feels like a very printmaking specific thing where like you don't get paid for it. Like another artist just essentially organizes it. You all make artwork and then you ship it to them and then they divide it up and then send it back to everybody. It's a very strange way of like sharing with one another that I don't think happens necessarily in other, at least visual arts. I think like maybe musicians get together and like share songs or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's really lovely just get like a set of prints in the mail and like they are part of a theme or part of an idea, but they're like outside of being just that portfolio or that collection, like they don't have a real definitive purpose. And so now they just sit in the box for me and then I'll eventually frame some of them when I can afford more frames.
The joys of paper works.
But Chrissy ran and got
This
her,
is the,
Oh, yay.
this is it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's cute, right?
Yeah.
I like that we got to share some textiles.
Yeah. That's lovely. Yeah. I feel less alone, honestly, because like that awkwardness, sometimes I'm like, is it too much? Am I overthinking it? But I feel what I feel. And I don't know why I feel that way. But I guess it'll be a fun journey figuring out. And that's all I can ask for really at this point.
Exactly. Do you have any other shares?
So same artist. Here we go. We'll start. Now we start. So the same artist as my book cover, I actually wanted to share.
Oh,
we
sweet.
worked on this print here. So this is just printed. It's not like fancy printed. So this is an illustration. This is an illustration, and so we worked on this closely together. And this is so I do. One of my many joys of being a comedian is producing shows, but also developing like the posters to promote these shows. So every year I do a show called Island Women Rise, and it is a platform for Filipina comedians and storytellers to just do their thing. And so it was really important for me to the beauty, like I think with the whole world like has a funny relationship with like beauty and things like that, and obviously it's changing, but even within the Philippines, like I think we really prized a certain kind of beauty over the other. You just have to look at the beauty pageants and the kind, like the folks that we send to the beauty pageants, right? So there's a lot of like young Filipino women, me included, just feeling like, okay, well, I don't know, I guess I'm less than, or I don't count. So together, Ahlyssa Dulay, so she created this illustration for me. And the important thing is like that everyone looked really different. My favorite thing is that like these Filipino women with hijabs.
Yeah.
Because like as a Filipino Muslim, I pretty much am the only Filipino Muslim I ever know in a room. So I almost never bring it up. And one thing I realize as I get older is like the less I bring it up, the quicker I forget how it feels to be that person. You know what I mean? Like it becomes, I'm starting to forget, which is wild. And so this was really, just really all kinds, just we're like as many Filipinas and different looks, And so, I'm really proud of this
color selection too. That blue is a fave of mine.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, maybe I should. Okay, so the yellow and the blue really means this was based on or inspired by a T-shirt that was worn during the EDSA revolution, the People Power Revolution. So that was when the Philippines had a dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, who was then deposed or through the EDSA revolution, People Power in 1986, which is that was like literally the year before I was born. And so so the people marched on the streets at Etsa is a road, and deposed him. And so this is like kind of taking that energy, because with, even though I feel like Filipinos sometimes are like extra marginalized within our own community because of all of the expectations, and like, so being a funny Filipino, or being, not sometimes I think it just feels like it's better if you stay quiet, right? Otherwise, you're criticized for not looking a certain way, or, so this for me was like Island Women Rise was really giving in a space to just like say whatever you want, the kind of humor that you have. And I think Ahlyssa nailed it.
Yeah. It's lovely.
Yeah. And this kind of font is like the kind of like hand painted signage that you would find in the Philippines as well. So yeah. Thanks, Ahlyssa. Ahlyssa amazing.
Yeah. Also, I think it's like really valuable for everyone to hear like all of the like considerations that go into creating a poster or creating a promotional piece, like the font choice, the color choices, the layout. Like there's just like, so much that goes into making those decisions.
It's my favorite thing, like collaborating with an illustrator or a designer to like nail the vibe of a poster. I like sometimes spend more time on that, just because that's my joy in life. Okay, I'm putting the show together, so
yeah, you're allowed.
It's mine.
We only have 2 shares, so if you had any others that you wanted to do before we wrap things up, please feel free.
Oh, you know what? Why don't I explain the book then?
Yeah.
So same illustrator, Ahlyssa. And so the book is, I wanted it to really convey sort of like there's no chapters in my book. It's kind of like a loose, almost run of, what's it called? It's not run of show, but like, free flowing, brain flowing.
What
happened? Free form. Yeah. when your thoughts just sort of flow without real
I like
logic.
trying to.
I'm sure there's like a literary term that describes this perfectly, yet none of us are going to know that.
I'm like, I don't know. But anyway, it's kind of like
Put it in the
floaty.
chat, people.
Floaty. It's floaty at best. So I wanted it to be really floaty. So this is basically me. That's me wearing the only Tausug outfit I have ever worn. So I have a photo of me as a child wearing this exact outfit. And so, so we just recreated where I, as an adult, am wearing it, and I'm looking at the clouds, thinking my super important Filipino thoughts. Yeah, and all of these are the plants. So nice. These are all the plants that I adopted in the pandemic. So sometimes it's not always like completely based on history or whatever. Sometimes it's just what you want.
It's
and
so nice.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched the cartoon Steven Universe?
Which one?
Steven Universe?
No, but I've heard great things about it.
It's really lovely, but there's like an aesthetic to that particular image that brings the Steven Universe energy to me.
It's funny because this was actually like the sketch. And so I was like, oh, I love this one. Then Ahlyssa shared me like a very beautiful, slick thing. But yeah, it just looked so slick. And as an artist, I didn't feel there yet. So I felt like a sketch. So we went back to that.
It's beautiful. The drawing quality is really great. I think that like if it was a really slicked drawing and like really crisp up, I don't think it would have like had as great synergy with the title as this does. Where like these are amazing, like super important thoughts, and it feels a lot more like genuine or authentic when it has that bit of like kind of like, I guess like raw drawing quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. And it's funny because like I had different options, and I polled my friends, and they all picked the slicker one. Majority picked the slicker one. But I think that there was a moment that was like maybe one of the first times that I was like, I have to like this. More than anyone, I have to like this because this is me. And so I completely ignored them. And I do not regret it.
When you like have a question or like I don't know, some decision in your life, and you like flip a coin and it lands on a side and your initial reaction is like, oh, I wish it was the other side. Then you have to just be like, okay, now I know where my heart lies. So if your friends all came back being like this and you're like, you guys are dumb. No.
Yeah.
Then you're like, that's not the right choice for me.
But I didn't even realize you could do that, right? It's like, well, I think before that I was like, well, the majority wins, right? Like you want the majority to like it. But that was the first time I was like, let's listen to my gut because I will regret it, you know? And so now it's like how you feel the first time you see things is valuable. And then sit with it, see if you feel the same, right? Yeah. I love being an artist.
Oh, this has been such a lovely chat. I feel like I could just keep chatting with you. Like I feel like I have more questions than when we first started.
I didn't talk your head off.
No, I loved it. This has been like such a pleasure.
Same.
Thank you so much for joining us and for your thoughtful shares and for being just so like giving with like the whole process of going from like working in a corporate space to like where you are now, a published writer on lists.
I'm important.
It's been lovely chatting with you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for thinking of me for this.
We hope that you have a really wonderful rest of your day. And
you also.
We will reach out to you soon. And hopefully we'll get to like collaborate in some other capacity in the future.
Oh my gosh, I would love that so much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.